good. Okay.
All right, thank you everybody for coming to Sophia's thesis defense. We are excited to have her provide her thesis, very extensive thesis on exploring belongingness, loneliness, and distinctiveness on a College of Agricultural campus. We're very excited. Thank you for everybody who's joining us from all over the country. And we're excited to have her friends and colleagues here. Really appreciate her committee members, Dr. Price, Dr. Sprayberry, Dr. Haynes, and I, for being on her committee. We're very excited about this and looking forward to sharing her work with you all. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to the woman of the hour.
Thank you. So as Dr. Vincent said, I am here to defend my thesis and present it entitled Exploring Belongingness, Loneliness, and Distinctiveness on a College of Agriculture Campus. Again, everyone knows me, but my name is Sophia Jaramillo-Vasconez, and I'm very proud, again, to be here today and share all my work with you. So, getting started, just wanted to give some background in why I created this study. It starts kind of growing up in Orlando, being very privileged to be in such a diverse area. That's always kind of been instilled as one of my personal values. And so building off of that, developing into a high school student at Colonial High School, being in that space, again, very diverse, I got to see the impact that diversity had on my own FFA chapter and how that really brought so much strength to our program. Moving forward into my undergrad career, I decided to pursue an honors certificate and did a study entitled Do You Belong? Stories from Minority FFA Members and Their Feelings Towards the FFA Association. This is all kind of connected and led me to where I am today, which is looking at belonging at not the FFA level, but instead a College of Agriculture level. And so I wanted to do, again, another thank you to my committee for being here with all your patience and love and support. I'm super excited to share everything with you today. So again, probably wondering why I chose plants. If you know anything about me, I am a naturalist at heart, and I love a good metaphor as well. When we look at rainforest and forest ecosystems, they're areas of supreme biodiversity. And just like in the natural world, there's a strength in diversity in our social areas as well. And so we are stronger when we embrace that diversity, diverse perspectives and diverse backgrounds. And so I really love that metaphor for my slide theme today. But moving on into our introduction. So we know that student demographics are rapidly changing in the US, especially in higher education. We've had a 45% increase with students of color, as well as a rapid increase with students with disabilities, as well as female enrollment in our universities. Females actually outnumber men at most universities right now. We also know that retention, right? Getting students from their first year to their last year in graduation is a huge concern at these universities. A lot of these students are leaving after the first, second year before they even get the chance to walk that stage. And so we also know that there are certain at-risk groups concerned when we talk about retention. And that includes some of the groups I've talked about, including low-income students and first-generation students as well. We also know that belonging is crucial for retention. It also helps us in student success and motivation and mental health as well. And just like that, with a lack of belonging, we start to see loneliness and distinctiveness start to muster up, as well as disengagement and poor mental and physical health, unfortunately. In order to combat retention crises, in order to make sure that we embrace the diversity coming to our universities, we really need to focus on creating more inclusive environments to improve that student engagement and well-being. So for this study, my theoretical framework, I've said it a bunch of times, I'm going to say it a bunch before we finish, was belonging. And so we know that back in the 30s, belonging kind of started being known as a construct or affiliation as a motivation for us humans. We also know with Maslow's hierarchy, gotta love that good old pyramid, that we saw love and belonging on the middle of that model, right? We know that it is a psychological necessity, and that's what research has built on since that original study in the 50s. Now, like I said, without belonging, we have certain deficits, including depression, anxiety, stress, that mental and physical health is a huge concern. And in higher education specifically, belonging is crucial for that success and retention, like I said, and underrepresented students face a lot more challenges. So this is a model from Dr. Strayhorn in his book, College Student Sense of Belonging. This was a huge source in my literature review, and I really like his model because it directly builds on Maslow's hierarchy. We see love and belongingness in the middle of that pyramid, meaning that we have to meet our sociological and safety needs before we get to that. And in order to then get esteem and self-actualization, love and belonging has to be met. And so he also builds on that, allowing students to get their fullest potential, allowing them to fully engage with their own educational mission. We really need to get that belongingness. So moving on, this brought us to our purpose. My purpose was to explore how a sense of belonging and feelings of loneliness affect perceptions of representation and distinctiveness among students in the Martin Gatton College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment, or MG Cafe. We had 4 research questions, starting with 2 quantitative, which included looking at the levels, right? We did a survey, we had 4 areas in that survey, and 3 main ones were belonging, loneliness, and distinctiveness. So we wanted to see those levels reflected in our population. We then wanted to look a little bit more specific, looking at those demographic characteristics to see how those demographics related to those reporting of belonging, loneliness, and distinctiveness. From there, I wanted to look into the qualitative realm, which my background primarily is in. And through focus groups, we really wanted to explore what themes emerged among the focus groups' lived experiences in MG Cafe. And then we brought it all together with our mixed methods research question, which was looking at the ways that our interview data and reported feelings of belonging, loneliness, and distinctiveness help to explain those quantitative results. We wanted to really combine those and look at them together. Now we get to the fun methodology. So like I said, we did a mixed methods design. And this specific one was explanatory, in which we started with that quantitative survey analysis. We followed it up with qualitative interviews, and then we brought it all together in our interpretation of that mixed methods data. I myself had a pragmatic philosophy, even though normally I'd say I'm more of a constructivist. I felt that to best approach our subject matter, we really had to go into pragmatism because it gives a much more holistic way of solving the real life complex experiences of our students. Along with this, in order to do this study well, I had to reflect on my own potential biases, and we included a researcher reflexivity statement in order to do that. Now, let's jump into our quantitative data collection. We utilized convenient sampling, focusing on a course entitled AFE 100, which is a required course here at the university and the college for freshmen to take. And then we also utilized flyers that were posted in their AFE 100 course shell, as well as posted around Ag campus in order to recruit folks to complete our survey. All that said, we had 231 participants complete that survey. And of course, they were all students within the college, and they were also all above the age of 18. Like I said, our questionnaire had 4 parts. First was our general belongingness scale to measure belongingness. Next was our UCLA loneliness scale to measure loneliness. Then we had our demographic questions. And then lastly, we followed it up with a distinctiveness measure that was adapted from a previous study. Now, in order to analyze everything, we had to use our good old friend SPSS. And in using SPSS, we ran descriptive statistics tests, which focused on measures of central tendencies, so mean, median, mode, all of that. And then we also used a Spearman's row correlational analysis to look at all of the relationships and their direction. as well as their significance. Now we jump to our qualitative data, my personal favorite. We utilized snowball sampling in order to recruit our participants. I reached out to a leader in our fraternity that's associated with agriculture here at the university, as well as a manners advisor in order to recruit our participants. All that being said, we had 7 participants that were split into 2 focus groups. One had 3 upperclassmen women of color, who I affectionately gave them pseudonyms based off of gems and rubies because of their brilliance, their strength, their beauty in dark times. Our second focus group was composed of freshman white men that were in that fraternity. If you recognize those names, yes, they are from the Avengers, because I felt like they were superheroes in their own right. And so I affectionately named them Steve, Tony, Bruce, and Clint. Again, all of these students were in the College of Ag, and all were above the age of 18. And you can look at the demographic data that we collected in those figures up there. We did small focus group interviews. They lasted about 60 to 90 minutes. We followed a semi-structured interview guide so that it really just felt like a structured conversation. It was really free-flowing. I felt the participants really felt that they could speak their mind. And then we also had different data sources to pull from in that collection. We have the interview transcripts themselves, the audio recordings, the field notes, as well as a research journal that I kept. In order to analyze this, we did several rounds of coding, which included attribute, holistic, eclectic, emotion, in vivo, and axial. I really wanted to get a well-rounded approach, looking at the different emotions that they displayed, looking at it line from line, and really carefully analyzing it in their own words, and then assigning general codes. In order to encourage trustworthiness, we did number checking with an audit trail. And then we get to our last part, which was our mixed methods approach. We decided to use a visual joint display analysis. In doing that, like I said before, we took our quantitative results and our qualitative results and put it together in a chart that you can kind of easily read and navigate all of our data in the way that they are interconnected, because there's a lot of intersections. Let's get into our findings. Research question 1 was, what are the levels of belonging, loneliness, and distinctiveness in MG Cafe students? I wanted to point out that belonging and distinctiveness were on a 7-point scale, while loneliness was on a 4-point scale. So based on that, we discovered that as far as belonging goes, students somewhat agreed that they felt that they belonged. As far as loneliness goes, they were kind of rarely feeling lonely. And distinctiveness, they couldn't really agree or disagree whether they felt distinctive in the college. Our second research question was, what were the relationship between minority student demographics and their reported feelings of belonging, loneliness, and distinctiveness in MG Cafe? Like I said before, we did a Spearman's Row correlational analysis, and that was really, again, to see the direction of relationships and whether or not they were significant. What we found was that race was significant across the board. Racial minorities reported lower belonging and higher loneliness and distinctiveness. We also found that first generation, as far as loneliness, was significant, and that first generation students tended to report lower loneliness. We found that living on campus was associated with higher loneliness, and exposure to a belonging module was linked with higher loneliness as well. As the year in school increased, I thought this was really interesting. While they didn't meet our significance, I still wanted to point it out. So again, as year in school increased from first to later years, we found that students tended to report slightly higher loneliness. And then as far as commuting to campus, they were a bit less likely to feel lonely. Now we get to our qualitative findings. Throughout all the interviews, transcripts, all the data that I collected, I identified 3 themes throughout our data. The first was finding belonging by homophily, and we're going to start there. So we found that participants became self-advocates in their search for involvement on campus. In finding that belonging, participants tended to move towards organizations that were more homogeneous, right? and that really emphasized in their demographic backgrounds. So, for example, Bruce kind of said that, well, when you have an ag background, you always end up to find some connection, right? And he could imagine that you have to put a lot more effort when you're not from an ag background to like fit in. Sapphire said that if you have a community, it's a lot easier to stay here. The reason she stayed was really because she knew what her end goal was, and that I have a support system here now that she's had to establish herself, becoming that self-advocate. Clint said that the university does a great job at presenting opportunities, but you still have to take that step and put yourself out there to be active in that community. Our next theme was gatekeepers and advocates. Participants encountered numerous instances of gatekeeping and advocacy in different fronts. Gatekeepers often mediated that access, right? Closing the gate or opening it to resources, opportunities, and accommodations, while advocates actively supported and advised students throughout their search for belonging. For example, Clint felt like professors in the College of Ag really make an effort to connect with you. Unfortunately, Garnet and Sapphire spoke on behalf of their own experiences helping a fellow student in the college find accommodations. Unfortunately, despite the efforts of the Disability Resource Center and all the accommodations that were agreed upon, they experienced numerous times of those accommodations being violated or not met by professors. Even the accessibility of our buildings, there was incorrect Braille on some of the buildings here in the College of Ag. Now, they said that luckily they had just onboarded a new DRC representative who happened to be a woman of color, and that she had taken on almost every last student of color that was seeking accommodations in that area. They said that her schedule is booked and busy, and she has been a true advocate and champion because Sapphire jumped in. The only people fighting for us are people that are like us. Lastly, Steve unfortunately had some negative experiences with gatekeeping, observing that when he would email his advisors, he wouldn't hear back or get some generic look at this website answer, while he watched other friends get a personal typed out paragraph from the same person in 5 minutes. The next theme was perceived imagery. And this was about how participants' personal perception of how they were viewed, often based on demographics, impacted their ability to find and maintain belonging. And this often, unfortunately, manifested through experiences with perceived stereotypes, microaggressions, and their different takes on representation. For example, Garnet talking about it's harder when you're that token person, because there was a girl that was on every single last banner you could think of because she was an international African student. Sapphire jumped in saying, that's happening to me right now. Her major kept reusing her photo and they've reposted it 5 times. Garnet said it's like a zoo. Tony talks about how they think that we're all cowboys, talking about his fraternity. And yeah, there's a stereotype, but there's a stereotype with everything. And Bruce jumps in and says, there's always stereotypes in every part of life, but I think ag majors kind of get clowned for it. They think we're just a dumb farm kid. Sapphire, talking about that course AFE 100, recalls that they didn't really talk about the diversity within it. Felt like they just skimmed over it, and that when they do, they only refer to them, Hispanic people, as labor and not as people. Ruby talked about how she had Hispanic classmates that video that they showed made them super uncomfortable. It was a video of them deporting migrant farm workers, and that they felt that MG Cafe saw them would always be in that labor sense, not as a student or scientist or a researcher. In order to put everything together, our quantitative and qualitative results, we depended on this joint display. And for our ease of reading it today, you can look in the packets that I passed out. I gave them to you in order to kind of reference them. Makes it a little bit easier to read than up here. And I wanted to really highlight the differences, again, between the qualitative and quantitative data. And you'll start to notice some patterns as I kind of walk through it today. So we saw that non-white students and upperclassmen reported lower belongingness scores, and they perceived there to be a lack of organizations welcoming to minority students outside of Manners. Manners and AGR were our primary organizations that were mentioned throughout the videos. Sorry, the interviews. Now on the other side, freshman white men described the environment as welcoming and genuine. They perceived there to be a surplus of organizations and opportunities. They believed that uninvolved students just kind of were content in their own right, and they didn't really feel a need to belong. As far as gatekeepers and advocates, upperclassmen women of color felt there was a lack of advocacy and negative gatekeeping from faculty and peers within the college, but they felt advocacy and positive gatekeeping when they were outside of the college. The exact opposite was with our other focus group. They felt that advocacy and positive gatekeeping within the college and benefited from AGR and their mentors there, and they felt a lack of advocacy and negative gatekeeping outside of the college. For women of color, they felt excluded as far as perceived imagery went, and their perception was negative due to a lack of representation in things like media, curriculum, and organizations. They also really noted and went deeper into that idea of tokenism with those images. On the other hand, white men felt naturally integrated due to their higher representation in the demographic, their agricultural background. They didn't really question their imagery in MG Cafe. They did, though, feel alienated when they were outside of the college. On to loneliness. So, with our women of color, unfortunately, they felt exacerbated by isolation from peers and that lack of a shared ag background within the college. On the other hand, our other focus group felt familiar with the community and really felt it easy to connect within the college. But again, when they were outside of the college, that sense of loneliness was high. As far as gatekeepers and advocates, our first focus group felt marginalized and unsupported within the college due to a lack of advocates and gate-kept accommodations, which increased those feelings of loneliness. They felt supported and less isolated due to strong connections outside of the college, primarily with students and faculty of color. On the opposite, our second focus group felt supported and less isolated due to their strong connections with faculty that shared ag background and felt unsupported outside of the college. As far as perceived imagery goes, loneliness was often linked to microaggressions and stereotypes with our first focus group, and often also feeling invalidated from white peers when they would go to their friends with experiences of microaggressions, and it was always just kind of like, oh, well, that's not what they meant. That sort of approach. With our second focus group, they didn't experience exclusion, and their experiences aligned with the dominant group within the college, but they reported feelings of loneliness connected with barriers, such as distance from campus, as a lot of these students were commuters. They also felt that the stereotypes outside of Cafe and even back home were significant. Almost there. Our last joint display was distinctiveness. And so again, I'm going to highlight some of the themes. So I would identify that the upperclassmen women of color felt chronically distinctive in their environment in MG Cafe. No matter where they were, they always felt that sense of distinctiveness as a minority, as one with not an ag background, etc. Whereas our second group felt that they fit in with MG Cafe. Again, going back to our first group, as far as gatekeepers and advocacy, they felt organizations and minority faculty were underutilized in meaningful leadership and outreach within the college. Felt like they should really be compensated more and advertised more. On the other hand, our second focus group didn't really feel a need for specific advocacy. They were kind of laissez-faire about that, and they honestly felt more need for advocacy outside of the college. Again, going back to our first focus group, they reported feeling tokenized, unfortunately, with the repetitive use of their images, but then no support to follow that advertising. They also felt pressures to be a model minority within the college. On the opposite, our second focus group saw themselves as a norm and didn't really perceive distinctiveness as a barrier to belonging within the college. Now we get to our conclusions. I'm going to start with the first conclusion, which is that while MG Cafe students generally experience reasonable sense of belonging, there are certainly gaps, especially for those underrepresented students. Again, they generally experience a moderate sense of belonging, low levels of loneliness, and kind of neutral feelings towards distinctiveness. There's a need for intentional inclusion efforts to improve both belonging, especially in marginalized areas. In order to combat this, I recommend these three things. One is heightened mentorship and peer connection. More mentorship programs with diverse representation, especially past the first year, is really essential. Should also really be methodical about our advisor pairings, right? Looking at that student, really asking them who would be the best fit for you as far as our advisors go, especially when we talk about negative experiences within the college. Along with this, more inclusive events and organizations are definitely needed, hosting cross-major social events and partnering meaningfully with inclusive organizations like Manners, not just slapping their logo on a flyer and calling it a day, is really, really essential. Experiential learning should also be utilized. Even though it's not directly connected to DEI per se, there's several studies that have said that just simply going on those field trips and immersing yourself in the environment with faculty increases belonging and helps students feel like they belong within a college. Our second conclusion was that belonging and loneliness levels vary significantly from demographic, especially with our racial minorities. As far as this goes, I definitely recommend more representation and cultural support within the college. I understand that new legislation is making that a little bit difficult, but there's still some sneaky ways that we can support organizations that make networking groups, right? Our affinity spaces, like the MLK Center, like our LGBT offices, and also DEI dashboards, which is a novel approach that certain universities are taking. On their websites, they basically have a space where they post all of their data as far as DEI goes, as well as resources, support links, tons of information in a real central hub on their websites. We should also engage faculty more. We already have to take mandatory trainings. I don't see the harm in including one about unconscious bias and microaggressions. Also, a huge recommendation is finding ways to sustain that belonging over time. As they increased in their years, they felt less belonging according to our results. And so developing long-term initiatives that tackle this are essential. Lastly, preventative mental health strategies are essential. We know that a lack of belonging really harms our mental health. And so finding more resources that are preventative. We already have great ones at the university called tracks, the counseling center, the Let's Talk approach, and of course, integrated success coaching. But I think we can definitely expand that and put more funding into those areas. Our next conclusion was that students in MG Cafe experience a complex journey towards belonging shaped by homophily, gatekeeping and advocacy, and perceived imagery. This was really from our qualitative results. I have several recommendations for this, so bear with me. The first one is that we should actively still support homophilic belonging pathways with balance, right? We're not saying that homophily is bad per se, but it was really observed that a lot of students found a home within the college in areas that reflected their demographic backgrounds. So expanding and promoting diverse student organizations such as Manners or AGR that offer that sense of solidarity, right? We're in the Department of Community and Leadership Development. Solidarity is one of those tenets, and we should embrace it. Along with this, again, going back to that peer support, we've seen approaches like Ask Ezra, which was an online forum in which folks could anonymously post questions, and we'd have staff and fellow students answer them publicly. Student success advocates were almost like advanced student tour guides in a way, crossed with peer support. Number two, mitigate gatekeeping and foster advocacy. So it's huge, unfortunately, in our faculty and staff. Whether intentional or not, there was gatekeeping. Now, we need to train them to recognize and remedy that. We should also incentivize advocacy work, especially from faculty of color, who unfortunately were observed to potentially be tokenized in our environment. Lastly, we really should be implementing equity audits on the college and feedback tools to monitor that fairness in things like scholarship, leadership, and research opportunities. I know that the different rules on affirmative action may change things, but we really should adapt with the times. Number three is addressing stereotypes and enhancing representation. I've said a lot of this before, but again, increasing visibility of diverse faculty, integrating diverse histories, identities, and cultural elements into things like curriculum. Ag connects all of us, so does culture, and so does diversity. So let's embrace that. And of course, actively celebrating cultural self-expression is huge, especially in these organizations, changing the music that they're playing and embracing those different traditions. Promoting skill building and self-advocacy was a huge way to combat loneliness. Focusing on those soft skills, how to meet people, how to connect with people is huge. So organizations can offer certain workshops, right, to help students develop those soft skills and connect with those. Lastly, cross-cultural engagement is a necessity. Kind of mentioned switching up events and using them across majors. We should be doing that across our organizations as well. Intentional opportunities with intercultural exchange. We have so many out of country international students in our college. We should be facilitating places where they can share that knowledge. Our last conclusion was that there were notable disparities between belonging, loneliness, and distinctiveness across those demographic groups, with upperclassmen women of color reporting the greatest sense of disconnection and exclusion. For this, imposter syndrome was kind of mentioned throughout those interviews. While it's difficult to do this without actual professional therapy, there's still ways that our faculty can kind of encourage and stop promoting that imposter syndrome, right? So again, advertising those therapy services is going to be huge to combat imposter syndrome, and also just training faculty to recognize it and celebrate their students' successes is going to be a huge way to combat that. Curricular and classroom-based belonging was huge. Some students reported that in classes like AFE 100, it felt like a family, and that definitely impacted their sense of belonging. So those sorts of collaborative learning environments can foster that connection. We should also, again, look at our curriculum and increase our cultural perspectives across our disciplines, where often representation in agriculture is seen more as a labor standpoint and not just a human standpoint. We should also increase visibility and representation and institutionalize a culture of belonging. The burden shouldn't just be on the students. It should be on the students and faculty, and definitely the university as a whole. And so looking at those support centers and making sure that it is a shared responsibility that is in their mission is essential. So just wanted to go over 2 recommendations for future research, one of them being longitudinal studies. Definitely following these students from year 1 to year 4 and beyond would be a huge advancement in this field, as well as exploring more of tokenism and representation in depth. I would hypothesize that increased belonging would diminish a sense of tokenism and heighten the sense of adequate representation in these spaces. Also, looking more about acute and chronic distinctiveness in these spaces would definitely benefit students as well as our research. That being said, I wanted to thank you for all the attendees today. Thank you to my committee. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for being here, and all my friends. And thank you for your countless support. It's been a lot of ups and downs, but I am very grateful to know and have all of you here. So thank you.
Thanks, Sophia. What I want to do right now is I want to provide the opportunity for the people who are attending, as well as our guests, to feel free to ask some questions.
Yeah.
For probably the next 10 minutes, and then I'm going to probably ask them to, everybody to leave and then continue to do your defense with your committee. Okay?
Sounds good.
So,
What questions can I answer?
How are you watching questions on
Well, I just have the PowerPoint.
You're good. What's up?
what do you think the limitations to your study was? And if you could redo it, what would you do different?
Oh, that's a great question. A huge limitation was unfortunately our data rollout or our collection rollout. And so I wish that I started a lot farther in advance securing that. Unfortunately, my assumption is that with all the changes with the EI, we had some senior faculty that were a little hesitant to allow us to enter classes. And so that was a huge limitation, was that we expected a bigger response rate. And so unfortunately that led us to kind of simplifying some of our codes. So for example, as far as our minorities in the college, we had to kind of simplify them to white and non-white instead of looking at all of those differences within those identities. So that was a huge limitation.
I want to piggyback on that one.
Yeah.
You said that there were 231 of the whole population.
Mhm.
What percentage of that is representative of the College of Ag? Or
Like looking specifically at their demographic characteristics or
like all total, like 231 out of, I don't even know how many people are in the College of Ag.
yeah, we have about 2,500 students in the College of Ag, so it's definitely a small sample of that population. And the majority of those participants were also female. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, can you walk me through how you did, you said snowball sampling
Mhm.
for the qualitative piece?
Yes.
What was the connection between the quantitative and the qualitative?
Yeah, so we did some univariate analyses with the results. A lot of it came from our Spearman's row analysis, and we really wanted to look at, we saw that race was significant. So we knew that we wanted to get two different groups as far as that. We also saw that while year in school wasn't as significant, that was a point of interest. And so that kind of brought us to our upperclassmen and freshmen.
So of the seven,
Mhm.
did all seven of them answer the quantitative piece?
Unfortunately not. Again, that was another one of our limitations, that it was really difficult to recruit participants. I had reached out to 12 of the folks that did respond to the survey and say that they were willing at the time, but I didn't get a response when we followed up. And so that was another limitation to the study as far as recruitment. But we did get all of those participants that were members and students in the College of Ag, and again, fulfilled those demographic characteristics. Any other questions?
I just want a clarifying question. I think I understand it, but distinctiveness in this context just means like you feel like you stand out.
Yeah, so distinctiveness really, and it relates to your identities. So identity salience or aspects of your identity that you feel distinctive. So for example, me being Latina, I at times have felt distinctive in this department because of that identity. Not necessarily a per se, but it's really just something that is occurring in our environments. Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Online people? Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Okay.
That's
Yes.
another one. Okay. I personally know you're planning to go into like a high school classroom, secondary. How do you think the findings here would translate to that level?
Thanks for that question. Yes, I do intend to return to teaching in Florida. And so looking at belonging is a huge motivation to go into that field. I think at the end of the day, even though some people may not call it belonging, we're all searching for that. And so being in that classroom and teaching agricultural education specifically gives me a chance to foster that sense of belonging through things like FFA, organizations like Manners, to make students feel cool, to make students feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And so belonging, loneliness, and distinctiveness is going to be hugely on my mind, not just because of this study, but because that's a huge motivation for me to go into that career. Yes.
I just wanted to piggyback on to Dr. Epps. In an exploratory sequential design, which she and explanatory sequential design, you don't, your qualitative group does not have to be from the quantitative population.
Yeah.
No, but I was wondering what her cutoff, I mean,
Yeah.
you still have to have a reason to go to that.
Absolutely.
One thing, and I don't think you really, and you didn't highlight in your presentation, and maybe it's in, and I haven't read the thesis.
Yeah.
So I was just curious about what your thoughts were about how year in school increases their loneliness.
Yeah.
That one was surprising to me.
Me too. I think I have to assume that that really again reflects in the broader college environment. And so even though as their year in school within our qualitative data said that we found our community, that connection to the broader campus environment kind of diminished. So once they found their community and their support network, they didn't really feel a huge sense of seeking belonging in the broader college context. So that would be my assumption. But again, that's one of the recommendations for future research that I think really needs to look into, because why are students feeling that way as they get older?
Can you go back
Yeah.
to the second recommendation? Oh,
Did I miss it?
sorry. Just to the slide, go forward.
This one?
No, one more. Okay. No, you're fine. Sorry.
No, you're
I
good.
had a question, but I did.
Any questions on the Zoom? Hi, everyone. Dad's waving his finger like this.
Awesome.
Hi, Izzy.
Then I'm going to ask everyone else to step out and we'll continue the defense.
Thanks. All right, bye, everyone. Love you. Thanks for being here.